Looks like we're live. I think just waiting for the feed to come through. Yes, looks good. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Just checking a few little bits and bobs, make sure that everything is working all right. So please do let me know, drop me a comment, tell me where you're from, and let me know if you can see me and if you can hear me all right. Leader's already way ahead of me and letting me know that the sound is good. Thank you. Brilliant. So, wow, lots of people here today. So I'm going to get on to answering some questions and demoing some stuff pretty quickly. So just a real quick intro for what I'm doing today. So some of you will know, some of you would have answered the email. I sent out an email about a week or so ago asking basically everybody on my email list, what do you struggle with most with color? And I got literally hundreds of replies that I'm frankly still going through because they're still coming in. So it surprised me to begin with. And then I thought, well, this is something that I should probably do something with. So I decided that rather than just put together kind of some kind of a demonstration that I would like, the kind of thing I would normally do, that I would actually answer some of these questions. And then I thought, well, you know what? There's so many of these questions. I'm going to be lucky if I get to more than about 3 of them today, because I want to answer them in a certain amount of depth, including demonstrations. So I thought, well, maybe this could be a regular thing. So if you like this idea, let me know. Email me or drop a note, a comment. And if you enjoy this session today, I'll be happy to do some more, maybe once a month or something like that, or maybe once a fortnight, we'll see. But there were so many questions, and there were so many good questions and interesting questions as well, that I was just reading through them and thinking I would love to do a session on that. I think that would be really helpful. So that's what this is about, and that's how this whole thing started. And if you sent me in a question, thank you very much. I am only going to be looking at about 3 of them today. But I've tried to put a few together. So for each of those questions, quite a few people asked the same question. So as much as I can, I'll be looking at things from that point of view, trying to pick out the most popular questions, kind of interfaced with the ones that I think I can do the best job of doing a demonstration or suggesting some ideas for how to approach color for painting. And then we'll just see how it goes. So, hello everybody, really good to see you all. Wow, we've already got over 100 people watching. I imagine a few more will join as we go. So let's crack on. So firstly, let me tell you a couple of the questions that I'm looking at today, okay? So I'm going to look at 3 questions. Hopefully I'm going to look at 3 questions. This is going to be a reasonably kind of a free-flowing session, not quite as organized as when I normally teach. By all means, please ask questions as we go along. Interruptions are fine. If there's anything that you don't get, just ask. Or if you have any other questions that I might be able to answer as we go along, anything you'd like to see me do, stick a comment in the comment box and we'll see how we go, okay? So 3 questions I'm going to look at today. The first one is, how do I get the value of my shadows right? Now, there were a few permutations of this question, and many of them included value and color. Now, getting the color of shadows right is a pretty big question. I may do a session just on that, but that's one of the questions I'm going to answer today, is how do I get the values of my shadows right? And I'm going to answer it with a demonstration. I'm going to paint a little demonstration. Apologies if for anyone here who has already done my color course, because the photo that I'm going to use for the demonstration, the photo reference, is in that course. So you will probably have already painted it, so you'll know what I'm about to do. The next question is, this is an interesting one. How can I keep my colors from getting too garish? And this came up quite a lot. I was really interested to see how often this one came up in different kind of permutations. And this is basically about chroma. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to that one. Okay. And most often people were asking, how can I use complements in order to, people use various terms for this, deaden my colors, or some people actually say reduce chroma. Most people say neutralize the colors. We're talking about the same thing. So I'm going to show you some stuff there. I don't use complement mixing. I have a different way of doing it that I think is more reliable, and I want to suggest you give it a go. If you struggle with complement mixing, and frankly, I'm not surprised if you do, because there's some really good reasons for that, but we'll be looking at that. And the last one, assuming we have time to get to this, I hope we do, even if I only do it quickly, I'll have a quick chat about it, is how do I determine which colors to choose initially to create a new color? So you've got a color you want to mix. How do you go about deciding which tube colors you're going to use to mix it? Okay. Probably won't come as any surprise to most of you that the way I approach that is from a point of view of hue, value, and chroma. But I'll talk through a little bit about how I do that, okay? And then if there's any more questions at the end, I'll answer them. I will be painting and I will be mixing for some of today, so I'll try and answer any questions that come up as we go along. Thank you, Suzanne. They're not that new, these glasses. I've had them for a little while now, but they're still they're new-ish. Okay, I'm going to switch over to, I've got a camera on the easel. Oh, let me show you actually, for anyone who hasn't seen one of my streams before, how I have things set up. So you can probably see some of it. I've got a camera here, which goes straight down onto my palette here. I've got a glass palette here. I've got a camera, I've got a camera there that I'm talking to you, and I've got another camera over there, which goes onto the easel here. Which will show the panel that I'm about to work on. So with a little bit of magic trickery, I can show you both the palette and this at the same time, and the reference photo that I'm going to be painting from. So that's what you're going to see. Maybe a little disorientating at first, but I'm sure you get used to it pretty quick. Okay, so here is the palette looking down from above. Here is the panel looking from over my left shoulder. So you get a little bit of perspective distortion on the panel, but there's no way around that. And then over on the right hand side at the top right, which is superimposed on the screen, so I can't actually point at any bits of it or anything like that, is the reference photo. It's the famous loo roll, right? So this is the question I'm going to be looking at here with this is, how do I get the values of my shadows right? Okay. Whoa, thank you, Suzanne. Suzanne says it's the best exercise in the color course. Oh, Jerry says, will this be recorded and posted for repeat watching? It certainly will. I mean, all of my live streams get recorded anyway on my YouTube channel, and you can always go in and see them. You just need to go in and select the live videos. The problem, of course, is that there's so many of them in there now. You could probably lose quite a bit of time just looking for the one that you wanted. So, but I will be sending out an email probably tomorrow with a link to this. So if you want to come back and watch it, it will be there. And a few other resources most likely as well. Okay. So if anybody's wondering, yes, it is recorded, so you can pop in and out. And that will be fine. Monica says, my image is not very focused. That's because of YouTube. I can't do anything about that, but you can. If you look down to the bottom right of your screen, if you're on a PC or a Mac or something like that, a laptop, and you should see a little gear icon. I'm not sure where it is if you're on a tablet, but there will be one the same. And if you have a look at in the settings, and you need to up the resolution. YouTube often throttles the resolution back. I'm streaming at 1080p, which is quite high quality, so we'll have to see. But sometimes if YouTube thinks that your connection isn't quick enough, it will restrict it a little bit. Okay. Mariana, nice to see you. Okay, let me have a quick check of something here just before I start fiddling about with painting this loo roll. Just want to make sure something is running. Yeah. Oh my word. That freaked me out a bit. I just checked the monitor and it tells me that 160 people are watching, which I think is probably one of the most people I've ever had on a live stream. So I'll endeavour not to get freaked out. Okay, so you can probably see that the loo roll the picture of the loo roll that I've got up there has been painted in, the loo roll's been painted in 3 different stripes, a light stripe, a middle value stripe, and a dark stripe. Now, in terms of values, if I remember right, they pretty much correspond to this one, is the light one, which is the value 7. Maybe it was an 8. The middle one is definitely a 5, and the one at the bottom, I think, is probably a 3. Okay, so dark to middle to light. And the reason that I've done that is because it gives you a kind of a little bit of insight into seeing what happens to the value of a shadow, depending on whether you have a light colored local, a middle, a light value local, a middle value local, or a dark value local, because very different things happen to the values there. So this is kind of by extension looking into the values of the lights a little bit as well, but I'm going to talk mostly about the shadows. I'll tell you what I'm putting out here. That was ivory black. This is raw umber. Yes, Suzanne, you know I'm going to have the raw umber out when I do the chroma exercise as well. And I'm going to use lead white. If you want to have a go at this, I will send you a bit of white. I will send you, this is Rublev lead white #1. I really like this. I think it's lovely paint. It works just as well, this thing, with this exercise with titanium though. I'll send out a link to this photo so you can grab it and have a play with it if you want to. So I'm going to begin by just mixing some basic values. So let's go full on the palette. See if I've got a version of this with that. Yeah, the reference a little bit smaller, just so it's still there, so to kind of give you an impression of what it is that I'm looking for. And basically, I'm going to begin by just mixing up some values. I'm going to mix like probably 5 values to start with. Now this here, in case anybody is wondering, is a Munsell value scale, which you can get from eBay. This particular one is made by a guy called Paul Cantore, who is a lovely man. They're very cheap. If you don't have one already, I highly recommend you get one. Let me drop a link in the comments so you can grab one of these if you want. I don't put them out, Paul does, but he's a lovely man. And he will even, sometimes he'll even send you a little thank you note on a post-it when you buy one of his value scales. And for the sake of $10, they're so outrageously useful. That's where you can grab one. Highly recommended. Thank you, VL. That's a very nice thing to say. I'm glad you do. Oh, was I? Let me knock this big light out because it's a little bit too bright. How long are we going to be going today? Probably a couple of hours, something like that, I would imagine. Depends. I mean, I'll just get through as much as I can. It's not really like a heavily structured session. I just want to try, especially if I'm doing these things regularly, I just want to try and answer a few questions that hopefully a lot of people out there are struggling with. because there's nothing worse than being held back by things that are not actually, well, I wouldn't say they're not that difficult, but there are ways around them. There are ways to learn, to accelerate your learning a little bit, if you like. And one of the basic principles that I think really helps with this is to practice first, but to practice getting things right. If you practice getting values wrong over and over and over, chances are, you're pretty much going to get really good at painting wrong values. The feeling of getting values right and seeing what it can do to the impression of space and realism in your work is quite transformative, I think. So this is a middle value I'm going for here, like a value 5. That's pretty good. Doesn't have to be perfect. So that one's right in the middle. So I'm just mixing up a quick value scale to play with, right? Let's say, then I'm going to do this one here, which is a value 3. I know some people like to mix up like all of the little values on the thing. I tend to only mix up five of them, sometimes 7, sometimes only 3 actually. Because you can mix in between these values for any other value that you want. Probably going to need a bit more of that. Raw umber, black. There's no particular proportion that I use for this. Sometimes I deliberately send it a little bit warm with more raw umber. Today I'm going pretty neutral. Neutral just means no discernible hue and no chroma. A big deal is made about perfect neutrals in Munsell's circles. I'm personally not all that bothered, especially if you're just doing a study with them, a value study. But I am bothered about whether the value is accurate or not. So this in itself, getting hold of a copy of this value scale, and this, by the way, is why it's so useful, because you can put little dabs of paint. It's laminated, right? Or it's some kind of card anyway. So like a plastic card. So you can actually put paint on it and then wipe it off again. So there's a value 3. You will notice that I'm already laying out my values in pretty careful order from light to dark. Let's do a 7. So that's this one here I'm after now. Now for me, it doesn't take me all that long to mix these because I've done it a lot of times, but if you're new to this and you haven't mixed values out like this before, don't be surprised if it takes you a little while. And don't be surprised if you find it really difficult at first to judge them accurately. But like I always say, when you find something that you really struggle with, be happy, because it showed you where you need to practice. It shows you something that you could do with some practice with. So that's 3 values, right? I've got a 3, a 5, and a 7. Should I do any more? I don't think I'll bother doing any more right now, because the white is actually, and the Munsell value scale, by the way, it goes from 1 to 9. So it's 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. I don't think you need the half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then white, slightly lighter than the 9, and ivory black, slightly darker than the 1. So white is about 9.5, and ivory black, anyway, is about 0.5 on the Munsell scale. Don't worry about the numbers too much. I mean, I think you can get too hung up on the numbers with Munsell to the point where you forget that what you're actually doing is making a painting. And people argue about whether, I've seen arguments on forums about whether a 1 should be a white or a 10 should be a white, and whether black should be 10 or whether it should be a 1. I mean, people get really annoyed about this stuff. I can't understand it myself. Doesn't matter at all. What matters to me is what you learn and how well you paint. And also, you know, how much you enjoy it, for God's sake. Anyway, 3 values. Probably be enough for me to start off with. Let me check the comments. The one thing about this is that whilst I'm doing stuff, I do often forget to check the comments. So I'll do my best. Red Sox, yeah, Richard is a really good friend. He's also a brilliant teacher and fantastic painter. He teaches, actually, for anyone who sees that comment there, Richard Murdoch is really worth checking out. He teaches Munsell-related stuff, but his style is different from mine. My style, you could say, is probably sort of, I don't know, how would you describe it? Maybe kind of loose and atmospheric. I like a bit of atmosphere. And Richard's paintings tend to be more highly finished. He's a brilliant painter. And sometimes, you know, it's one of those situations, sometimes I look at his paintings, I think, I wish I could paint things that finished. If I look at his paintings too much, I look at mine, I think they look really sketchy. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's my voice and that's what's going to come out. So pretty much how it goes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with this panel, I always paint like this, by the way, is I'm going to put a layer of oil on it. Linseed oil. Because I like to paint into what they call a couch, or in the French would call it a couche, I suppose. So that is a little bit of cold pressed linseed oil, a very small amount of solvent. I use terps. I'm going to slosh that on the panel. By the way, when I put these photos up for people to work from when I'm teaching, they have a grid on them. It just makes it easier to lay things out. Watch me mess up the drawing on this now because I don't have a grid. So I put that on there and then I wipe almost all of it off, so there's a very, very thin layer. You know, it just helps the paint flow, it helps the brushes flow, helps things cover. You get some nice brushy effects this way. It's also good for oiling out. So let's just sketch this out quickly. I'm going to use the value 7. So I'm just going to pop I'm going to sketch this out, and then before I actually start putting any values down, I'm going to begin to show you a way that you can start to figure out more accurate values. Now, this demonstration is going to assume pretty much that you're working from a photo, okay? Because most artists do these days, partly also because I'm streaming live, so it's tricky for me to be able to do it and have enough cameras to show working from live. Not impossible, but it's tricky. So I would like to do a session on values when you're working from life. I would really like to do that, but it's a much more complicated undertaking than showing you some good ways to do it when you're working from a photo. So what you basically want to do is if you want to have a go at something like this, get a photo. If you've got Photoshop, that's the best. Put it into Photoshop. I know it's not cheap, but it's outrageously useful if you're working from photos a lot. Put a photo you particularly like, preferably one you took yourself, into Photoshop. And put a new adjustment layer on it and make it black and white, a black and white adjustment layer. Got a polling drawing. This is what I get for talking and thinking at the same time as I'm drawing something out. I'm going to put the other stuff in here as well. So there's a cast shadow that comes off this. toilet roll. If I'm really honest, part of the reason that I chose a toilet roll is that I just thought it would be a pretty funny thing to paint, to learn values whilst painting a toilet roll. But it's also really useful. Why is it useful? Well, you can do this with spheres. Like you could get a sphere and you could paint 3 different values on the sphere and you could paint that. The nice thing about a toilet roll is the spheres are, they're pretty difficult to model in value. It's an extremely good exercise, but they're not the easiest thing to model. Let's just divide from light and shadow very generally. So everything this side is light, everything this side is shadow, okay? Basically kind of laid out. The nice thing about a cylinder is that it only changes in one direction. When you're dealing with a sphere, it changes all the way. It's really complex, the way the values change across the surface. So it's a bit more about a tricky thing to paint. The point of the exercise here is not to model form incredibly beautifully on, something like a sphere. It's to show you some basic stuff about values. Okay. Let me see if I can do you. Let me see if I can do you a screen share now. This is what I want to do. I want to show you some stuff about how you can use Photoshop. I'm going to have a couple of different ways of doing this. I'm going to try and show you how you can use Photoshop to check values. Hopefully this will work. Just bear with me a second while I get this. This is one nice thing about streaming. Is that I can, hopefully at least I can show you a bunch of stuff that I couldn't normally show you, or at least not very easily in a workshop environment. Success. So hopefully you can see this. Like this is the photo in Photoshop, and you can see I've got this value scale on here, which is on there too, and I can take that on and off because it's on a separate layer. Now, Photoshop is really good for this, but the interesting thing about this value scale, right? First off, there's 11 values, right? So this is the middle one, that's the value 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, and there's white. Going down, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and there's black. Now up here, usually when you go into Photoshop, up here it will show you this, which is called the hue cube, and you can change colors and stuff, mess about, do little tests and swatches and stuff with this. But if you open up these 3 lines here for the menu and you go into LAB sliders, now the L value is lightness, okay? So if I pick up this little pipette tool here, which allows me to take samples, so you can see it, especially here, like if I click around in this square, you'll see the value is changing, right? Okay. So if I click on this one, that's a value 6, 5. This is a 5. You see the number there is 50. The number there is 60. Here, 71. But 70 basically. 80, 90, 100. Now the L values here correspond to the actual values of a Munsell scale. So this is kind of a rule of thumb, but it works really, really well. So you can take this value scale, which I'm about to give you a link to download a JPEG of. With some photo editing software, you can stick it onto your picture and then you can check, like say, I want to know what the general shadow value is here. Now obviously there's a bunch of different values in here, but if I squint down, like most of this is pretty much the same value, right? So I've actually got this, you can have it set to a point sample where it would just show you a single pixel, but I usually have it set to like an 11 by 11 average up there. And then if I click around in here, see what happens to the numbers up here and to this square here, right? I realize it's very small, but 30, 33, 36, 34, 32, 34, 31. So I've clicked around a bunch of different points in here, and they're all 30 in the low 30s, right? So that means the value must be 0, 1, 2, 3. It must be around here, right? But that looks so much darker, doesn't it? I mean, if you just look at it there, you'd think, well, that's a lot darker than this here. And that's one of the problems of value, is it makes you think, because we see values in relation to each other, whatever values are around another value makes it seem different. So if I move this over there, is it actually about a 3? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let's try that again. Try and get it up there so we get like a 3. Yeah, it is, you know, it actually is. It's somewhere around here, so a little bit lighter, which is what we saw about a 33, you know, somewhere between that and that. It really is that dark. And if you just tried to judge it, pretty sure you would paint that lighter than you thought. It's actually right down the bottom of the value scale, okay? So having checked that one, what about this one? Well, there's a few different ones here, but they're all about 2. Interesting. What about this one? Well, that's going to be really dark, right? The darkest I can possibly get to. So of these shadows, obviously this one is the darker. Then this one, and then this one. But they're all concentrated around this area here. All of the shadows are really, really dark, even though you would probably paint that much lighter. And the difficult thing about this exercise is making sure that you get the difference between each of these values, okay? It's not quite as easy as it seems. So now is probably going to be a good time to pop back over and start doing a bit of painting, right? Hello, Olaf, good to see you. Oh yes, someone was asking how I attach the panel. I literally just stick them up with blue tack, but this is quite a light panel. It's an ampersand gesso board panel, and they're only like 3 millimeters thick, and it's just hardboard really. So, you know, they don't take up too much space. Now I'm gonna, just for sake of argument, I'm just gonna pop some values in here. Usually I would paint the background first. But I'm just going to stick some values in and see what happens, okay? So the shadow value, we were saying, of this top one here, was about 3.5, you know, maybe a little bit above 3, okay? So let's get a brush out and stick some paint on here. Probably not quite that big. So this is just an ordinary hog. So here is my value 3, right? I've got it here. I've got it on my value scale here. That's a value 3. So it's slightly lighter than that, so I could mix in a little bit of the one above if I wanted to, as long as I make sure it doesn't go as high as a 3.5. I want it still to be about a 3. And I can pretty much, as long as I get the shape right, I can pretty much put that in. Now, if you actually started a painting like this, I'm pretty sure there's no way that you would choose a value that dark for that part of the painting, because everything around it at the moment is pretty light. This panel actually I have used before, which is why it's slightly off-white. You just wouldn't do it, would you? I mean, you wouldn't make that light. But by using this value scale with Photoshop, that actually showed me pretty reliably that that's what that value should be. But I've got nothing to compare it to. You know, it's kind of difficult. But let's put them all in and let's just see, because I want you to see how this works. So the next one down was about a 2, right? So I need to go down a little bit from this one. Oh, do you know what? I forgot to put the link in for that value thing for you to grab. By the way, all of these resources that I'm showing you here, I will link to in the email, which I will send you tomorrow. Value 2, good. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because I need this to be slightly darker. It needs to show, I need to see the difference between these two values because this is the next stripe down. But there are lots of other visual cues in this picture that tell us that this is a shadow from the middle strip. So a value, I think I did it a value 8. I think I did, this top strip was a light value like a value 8, okay? So there's only like a value step between these. It's not very much, is it, really? You know, it looks dark. And the bottom one is like pretty much as dark as I can get, so I'll just put a bit of raw umber with a bit of black, and I'll put this shadow in. What a narrow range those shadows are in. So I'm hoping that at least some of you are a little bit surprised by that. How dark those shadows are. So I'm going to check, I want some values around there to try and give me a little bit more of a reference. So the value of the background is also actually very low. It's a little bit lower on the left than it is on the right, but on the left it's about a 3, 3.5, so it's about this value here. So I'll get a bigger brush and I'll just put some paint in there. 3, maybe a little bit more, a little bit higher, around a 3. By the way, I'm going to completely ignore, in the shadow side here, I'm going to ignore the division between the background and the ground there. I probably will show it here, but here, if I squint down, I can't see it. And it's a basic rule of mine that if I can't see something when I squint, I won't paint it. Let's whack this in. You know, I don't mind having a bunch of brush strokes in my background. In fact, I quite like it. But this is really just, oh, sorry, I topped the microphone with the brush. Just a demonstration. And when it gets over to this side, it's about a 4.5. So let's mix it a 4.5 quickly. I'll just check it against the value scale. That's pretty good. So about here, a little bit lighter. But these are all the dark values. These are all kind of shadow values that I'm putting down. So this is to give us some kind of a reference, and then a little bit between them to be able to see those values a little bit better. I have to say my drawing is pretty shabby. I'm going to have to tighten things up a little bit. I reckon a little bit later on. Need to go a little bit darker on the left because it's... I think I probably didn't wipe enough oil off. I was too busy yakking when I was doing that bit. So it's not covering as well as it might over here. I want this to go down. And by the way, if you have another good thing, if you have one of these value scales, if you want to check the value you've actually got, you can actually just use them like this. So I wanted, what was it? I wanted like a 3.5 over there. That's actually not looking too bad. I wanted something about there. And over here, I want like a 4.5, which is about there. Yeah, not too bad. I mean, I'm not going for like a masterpiece or something, you know, highly finished piece of work here, but I want to get the main values in. Let's paint the rest of it. So there's a cast shadow and the ground I want to paint. I think I just closed Photoshop by mistake. Didn't actually mean to do that. Did I close Photoshop? Yes, I did. So I'm checking these just in the way that I showed you. I'm going to show you some other ways that you can that you can check these values as well. Let's guess a value while I wait for Photoshop to wake up. Over here, I'm going to wipe a bit more oil off because I've got too much oil on here. I think it's light here. I think it's probably going to be like a value 8. So this is a 7. Let's get some white. I'm going to need more white. Now, I am pretty profligate with my paint. I would rather throw paint away at the end of a day than not have enough on my palette and be stingy and not have enough on my painting. You know, because a lot of the nicest effects that you get with paint, you need a fair bit on there. I mean, to blend effectively, you need enough paint on there to blend well. If you're too stingy with it, let's see if that's an 8. A little bit dark, pretty good. Let me actually check that value's right though, because I've got Photoshop up again now. See, something always goes wrong when you're live, guaranteed. I overshot a little bit. It's more like a 7.5 over on the right, on the left, sorry. So between these two, quite light though over here, like about this value. And I'm not even being that exact, I just want it to be pretty close. Here's the cast shadow, so I'll leave a space for that. And this value here that I'm putting down now on the light side, there's light drop off. So the light is actually coming from the left, you know, and it's going over this way. So there's necessarily a little bit of light drop off as it moves over to the right. And actually, by the time we get up here, it's almost down to like about a value 5, maybe slightly above. So this is between a 5 and a 7, so I'm probably putting like about a value 6 over here. I mean, I'm guessing this because I know it's going to get a little bit darker as it moves away from the light. So talking about shadows, there are two main kinds of shadows. There are what you call either an edge shadow or a form shadow, which these are, which is caused by a surface turning away from the light. Or there are cast shadows, which this is here. So I'm going to put my cast shadow in. Let's say that was probably going to be here. It's going to be slightly lighter than the darkest shadow there on that part of the loo roll, because when you think about it, it can't be as dark as that because the surface that this shadow is being cast onto is actually quite light. And I always think it's when you put the cast shadow in that suddenly your brain starts to tell you that there's something there. As long as the values are pretty good, you know, your brain will be telling you, oh, there must be something causing that shadow. Where's my softening brush? Soft edges. And with cast shadows, the edges get softer the further you move away from the object that cast them. Soften these. This is one reason it's a good idea to do the background first, because you can soften all your background edges first. And then paint the actual object over them. I mean, in reality, life is rarely that neat and you will want sometimes to change things, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb. And these values starting to look a little bit different now. This one doesn't look quite as dark as it did, still looks pretty dark. But it's looking like there's, I mean, it's the cast shadow that's telling you there must be something there, right? So that's pretty interesting. Let me try and catch up quickly with the comments and see if I've missed anything. You'll have to bear with me because when I'm painting, it's really hard to keep up with the comments, so I have to stop every now and again and check. I was going to put that value scale in, wasn't I? Suzanne says, what surprised me is how compressed the dark side is compared to the light side. Yeah, it is. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, because getting values right is partly what we see and partly what we know. Natalie is asking about the value scale. If you scroll up further up the chat, I linked it there, and I will also be, oh, thanks, Linda. Linda's already told you that. I will be sending you an email. I will be sending you a link to that. But I was also going to give you a version of that value scale, a digital version. It's a JPEG that you can actually grab, right? So this is mine. I made this, and you can have it for free. It's just a JPEG, but you can copy it and you can put it into your, if you've got some photo editing software, you can put it into your images. Doesn't have to be Photoshop. I've got another couple of options that I'm going to show you shortly for what you can, other stuffs you can use for this. Yeah, no, it's not Amazon, it's eBay, that value scale. So how are we doing here? All right, we've got some stuff going on. I'm going to just even some of this out a little bit. Now this is kind of pretty much the way I paint when I'm doing quick studies and value. These kind of value studies is I tend to work kind of fast and loose and then kind of smooth things over a little bit once I've got them in. Once I've got the main bits in, but I like brushy paintings. Depends if you like brushy paintings or not. Personally, I'm a big fan. But you can do this really slowly and carefully and get a very neat, very neat version of it too. You don't have to do it like this. So I'm going to show you that the Photoshop again. Actually, let's show you a different way of doing it. I'll show you a different way. So this is a tool. I'm going to send you a link to this first. This is a tool that some of you will be familiar with. A friend of mine has made, Michelle Clamp. It is the most brilliant thing. You can go into there and you can upload a photo, and I will show you. This is it, Chroma Magic, and you can click in various places around here, and you see this is, it does it for colors too. This is just values only, So it's showing me what value things are. So let's check, see what it says for this. Yeah, for this shadow here, you see it's saying 3, that's the value there. 5 neutral, 3. Value 3. Value 3. Value 2. Value 0.5. Pretty much as low as we can go, right? Value over here in the background, 3. Value over here, probably going to say 4. Yeah. Over here, 7 to 8, it says 7. Sometimes 7.5. Over here, 7. Back here, 4.5 to 5. Right? So this is a really useful tool as well. You can upload your own images in. So if you make a black and white image, and if you have that value scale that I showed you, you can click on various areas around here and it will show you what the values actually are. And then you can mix them on your value scale and bingo. it will keep you from making some big mistakes. Now, there's probably some of you thinking at this point, yeah, but isn't that taking the creativity out of it? Well, yes, it is. Of course it is. You can approach values much more creatively than this, but I think it's a really, really good idea to know what the values actually are before you start to play around with them, to understand why you're making decisions and how much you're changing them. And if you want to create good, believable form with good values, then this approach is really going to help you. Just do some studies. Don't bother about doing finished paintings. Just do some value studies like this, and it will really teach you the difference, you know, between what you would normally guess, because I guarantee it would 9 times out of 10 it would be wrong, and what the value actually is. And this way you can put down those values, you can be surprised by them, and you can learn what the value should have been. So over on the right hand side here, what values do I want? Well, it's saying 9.5 here. It gets a little bit darker as we go further around. To 9.5 to 7.5 is the range across the light side of that stripe. This stripe is like 7.5. So this value here and this value here are about the same. Going over to like 5.5 probably, yeah, about 5.5 there. This one on the light side there is 3.5. So this value here is the same as this value here. Who would have thunk it? Your brain tells you this is a dark stripe, so your brain tells you this value is darker than that, but they're actually pretty much the same. Actually, this one is slightly darker. Value, it will trick you every time. So this is like 3.5 to a 4 in the light. It gets over there, going to be like 2 as we're going into the shadow, okay? Let me remember those. So we had 9.5 to 7.5, 7.5 to 5.5, 3.5 to 4 to about a 2, all right? Let's stick some of those in on our little painting and see what we end up with. I made a right mess of my value scale, by the way, as you can doubtless see. So I wanted, what over here, let's do this top stripe first. I wanted a 9.5. That's almost white, but I don't want quite white. So I'm going to shrink it down a little bit and make this a little bit darker. The reason I want that is because there's a little highlight that runs down. And, you know, it's the funnest part of this. I think it's the funnest part of this exercise is like putting in that little stripe at the end. Oh, am I a bit quiet? The volume looks all right to me. I'm sorry about that. Apparently on an iPad I'm a bit quiet. I don't think I can really help much with that apart from trying to remember to talk loud. But inevitably I will start to drift off when I'm painting and talk a little bit more quietly. I'm sorry. Someone tell me if they managed to download that link okay. Which, are the links working for everybody? Someone's saying they've got a problem with the link. It should be all right. But don't forget I'll be emailing them out anyway. So I'm going to get a different brush out now because I like to keep my brushes pretty clean. So this is like about a value 9. Let's check it. Yeah, about a value 9. So I'm going that light over here. I'm only going to go a little way in. And then it was like about a 7.5. That's my 7 there. So it's between these two. Over here is about, I mean, this is going to be very blocky, right? I'm going to model the form a little bit once I've got this stuff, these main values in. I'm just putting them in as broad general values. And this also, by the way, will really, really help you if you want to get your values right, is to simplify them like this. Like, don't try and do the whole job at once. With all the little nuances. So over here we had a 7.5 in the light in the middle stripe. There's my 7. Let's make sure this is about right. A little bit too dark. It'll do. So the nice thing about, I mean, I know the numbers can seem a little bit dry, but the nice thing about them is that it teaches you something very interesting about value. So I want to draw your attention to something here. Between this value, the shadow value, and this shadow, this value of the next stripe down was one step of the scale. Between this value and this one is 2 steps of the scale. And that's because the darks are always more compressed than the lights. So you use a wider value range in the lights than you do in the darks. Freaky, huh? But that's basically how it works. And that's an example of what I was talking about when I was saying painting is it's a combination of what we see and what we know. So if you learn stuff like that, it can inform your choices, and you can end up making better choices about the values that you put down. And this one was, what was it, about a 4, 3.5 or 4 in the light. Down to like a 2 over here. And another thing that's interesting to note here is about the dark values. The number of steps between, with a dark local like this, the local just means the value that this is independent of light and shadow. Like if you painted this, what value did you use? You know, in a dark local like this, the number of steps between the light and the shadow is less than the number of steps between the light and the shadow on a light local. Another fascinating thing about value. And you can learn these things just by doing value studies. I've probably mentioned this before, but at one point I was so frustrated with my values. This is going back quite a few years now. I decided I was really going to have to learn to paint values well. So what I did was I stopped painting with color for a year and made myself just work with value for a year. And I learned so much in that year. It was actually towards the end of that year that I discovered Munsell, when a painter, the really good, highly skilled academic painter called Graydon Parish introduced me. I met him and he introduced me to Munsell. And it took my value studies to basically to the next level. He's a brilliant painter. You can check out his work. Look him up, Graydon Parish. He can be a difficult character, but he's a really, really good painter. Could you do all this without Munsell? Yeah, of course. The nice thing about Munsell is that it's a perceptually accurate scale, and many value scales aren't. That's an interesting question. Aram says, do you use and how chromium oxide green? The short answer is no. But I'm not on that at the moment anyway. But it's fine to ask questions like that. No, I don't use it. It's a little bit too low chroma, so I'm just going to soften the transitions between the kind of the half tone and the shadow. So this is what you might hear this referred to as the bedbug line or the terminator. And the edge of the terminator is soft, but you need to be careful because you want a soft edge because it's a form turning into shadow. But what you don't want is for the clarity of the terminator to disappear. You need still to keep the clarity between the light side and the shadow side. And that can be kind of tricky a little bit sometimes. Oh, and by the way, there is one more piece of software I wanted to tell you about. I'm aware that Photoshop is really expensive, right? I mean, I pay for Creative Cloud, which is £50 a month, but I use the audio, processing thing from Adobe. I'm processing this sound through it now. I use, what else do I use? Premiere for making videos. I use Lightroom for processing my photos. So for me, it's worth it. But it is expensive. There is another one called, what's it called? I'm going to have to check. I think it's Affinity something. I'll just check my notes and I'll tell you what it's called. So I'm just softening all of this a little bit here because I like to soften shadows because it makes everything look a little bit more realistic. And we've got to, I mean, obviously, Lou-Roll is hollow, right? So you've got to have the shadow in the top there. The drawing is so rough in this. It's giving you an idea though, right? Of how you can approach a way to practice. And this is the key with stuff like this, is to practice. I really believe that people don't practice enough. Most of the time, you want to make a painting. You sit down to paint and you've got a painting in mind, you want to make a painting. But the way to crack things like getting the values of your shadows right is to practice it. I know it seems perhaps a little bit dull, but personally, I quite enjoy doing stuff like this. And you gain sometimes you can gain some really, really useful insights through doing it. Kind of feel like I need to bring up the exposure of this camera a little bit. It's a bit dark, maybe. Trying to match the values on one camera with the values of the JPEG is not an easy job. So I'm leaving a harder edge over here because this is like a form against the light, and then I'll soften everything else. Because this is where we're turning into shadow, So it's like you want to soften it just enough without softening it so much that you lose the clarity, and it takes a little bit of practice. Like anything, Let's neaten things up a little bit here and there. Does that all make sense, though, what I was talking about there, about the difference between the steps between the... God, you've got to be so careful with that. Look, I just made a complete value mistake in there because I was too busy yakking, and I spoiled that bit now. Looks like a lump. The difference in the values between the shadow and the light. It's a really important thing to get that. The step between, the number of steps between the shadow and the light on a light value stripe like this and on a dark one are different. You get more stripes on a light local than you do on a dark one. More value steps. People do say to me sometimes that they don't understand how I can paint and talk at the same time. And what they probably don't realize is that sometimes I say things I don't mean to say because I'm thinking about the painting. I literally talk nonsense occasionally because I'm just thinking about what I'm painting. Sad but true. What value did we have there? It was like 3.5. 3 of 5. I'm just neatening up the forms a little bit here and there. So it actually makes sense. I've done the perspective slightly different. But there you have it. Let me check for you. What this other bit of software is called. Can I remember? No, I'm going to have to check it. Affinity Pro 2. Yeah, I was right. Affinity Pro 2. Now, this will work really well for you. I feel like I need a darker value over here. This will work really well for you if you are working from a photo. Now, obviously working from life is different. You can use a very similar kind of a method for it, but it's considerably complicated by the fact that the values that you see in nature are wider than the values that you can reach with paint. And that's true even with a still life, simple still life subject like this. Okay, so there are ways around it, but actually also the value range that you get on a computer screen is wider than the value range that we can reach with paint as well. So that's why I use that little value scale superimposed on the picture, especially when I'm teaching, to allow people to make that transition more easily so you can see the difference between a light and a dark. You can translate the values into the more narrow range of paint using that scale and match it up with this value scale. I mean, that particular scale that I've given you there, that JPEG, is designed to fit with this scale, specifically with the Munsell scale. It won't work with another value scale quite so well. Let me catch up with the comments. Oh, there's a bit I've got to do. Before I check the comments, there's a bit I've got to do. I was forgetting. One more thing I want to show you, okay? I'm going to get a fresh brush out for this because I need it to be light at the top. So there's a highlight that runs all the way down here because this is oil paint and it's slightly glossy. So I'll put it in here. You can hardly see it because it's only just a little bit lighter than the actual value there. You know, you can barely see it, right? But on the next value down, you can see it a little bit more. But an interesting thing about this is that as you go across the values too, that light value there, you can't just take white and paint it all the way down because the light value actually changes as well. So here, it's just a little bit lighter than the main value of the light, which was 7.5. So let's pick an 8 now. So I used like a 9.5 here. This is an 8. Not showing you to go a little bit lighter. I may have pushed the value too high there. Just slightly lighter. And then down the bottom in this stripe, if I went down there with that 8, it would look terrible. So what value did I have there? It was like a 3, 3.5. So if I go in with, say, a 4 to a 5 as my light stripe here, and it will read as a highlight in this dark value. If I picked up this value that I'm using here to paint this highlight and I put it in there, it would be way too dark. Look, I'll show you. Whoa, that's how dark it is. That's the highlight I was using. You know, yeah, I've spoiled the thing a little bit, but never mind. You know, it's all in the service of showing you something interesting. Let me catch up. Oh, that's no problem, Monica. Thank you for clarifying. Oh, so Wouter says GIMP is a really nice free one. GIMP is a brilliant tool. It's really, really good. It's as powerful as Photoshop, except that it's not as user-friendly and it has a steep learning curve. So if you don't mind messing around and reading a lot of YouTube tutorials, then yeah, GIMP is brilliant. GIMP does include lab values, I think, yeah. So Suzanne says, so in reference to the question posed, what about the values of shadows? What would you say in this example and why? Well, that's exactly what I've just done, Suzanne, is to show you a way, as long as you're working from photos, that you can actually figure out what the values you want really are. Because if you just try and eyeball them, because our perceptual systems are so bad at judging value, because they're not made for painting, they're made for other things, making sure we don't walk into stuff on a dappled sunny day and things like that. This is a way to show you what the values actually should be, and the experience of painting values right, even in a scruffy little study like this, can be quite transformative. That's the point of this exercise. There are things that you learn by doing a lot of value studies, like the stuff that I was talking about, the highlight being darker here, lighter and lighter, you know, the shadows being more compressed than the light, so wider range of steps here and a more narrow. You learn that as you paint, and those things help you figure out the way that value works, the way that light and shadow works. You don't have to sacrifice like 10 years of your life to do that. Just do one every now and again. Get yourself a toilet roll, some cubes, paint them different colors, stick them in a shadow box, take photos of them if you want, or paint them from life. It doesn't matter, you know. Either way, you will learn the same lessons about value. And hit the right values. The question was, how do I make sure I get the correct values? This is a way that you can make sure that you get the correct values. And the experience of feeling the right value go down in a very general way like this will change how you see values. You see, painters who have learned this kind of stuff by eye over a long period of time have learned the same stuff that you learn by doing this kind of exercise. It just took them a little bit longer, and they painted more. You know, which is why the kind of the top level of painters are, they paint all the time. You know, you have to if you want to learn that stuff. I want to draw your attention to this value here. Now we've got to the end. You know, looks way lighter now than it did. You remember when I first put that value down and it looked so incredibly dark? Once you see it in relation to everything else, it starts to make a lot more sense. Okay. Bit of a quick study, but you know, something that will hopefully spark a few ideas, maybe give you some stuff that you can experiment with. Hey, you're very welcome, Hans. Oh, let me catch up. Oh, the question posted. I must have missed that question. Unfortunately, I do miss. There are a lot of people watching. It's probably one of the busiest comment streams I've had, and I'm having a bit of trouble keeping up. So you were reminding me, weren't you, Suzanne, for something I've missed. So what about values of the shadows? What would you say this example and why? On the shadow side, the value steps seem to lighten slightly near the darker value below. Is that a trick of perception? Yes, it is. That's something called fluting, which you can look up. Oh, so the value of the cast shadow here, this is like about a value 2 to a 3. it's going to be slightly lighter than this value here, because the value of a cast shadow belongs to the surface it is cast on. Okay, so you wouldn't get the stripes that you see here in this cast shadow because it belongs to this surface, and this is quite a light value. It's between these two. It's quite a light value, the local. So this shadow here is going to be ever so slightly lighter than this one because this local is darker than this one. So with a slightly lighter local, so this is in light. So this is lighter. I mean, the local here is probably about a 5 or a 6. So it's probably more like around here. So we had value 2 here for our middle value local strip, and it's about the same value here. Let me check it. Actually, I've got it a little bit lighter. It should probably be darker than that. That's about a 3. Sorry, my voice is starting to go. It's always bad news when you're streaming live. So it actually should be probably more like a 2. So let's bring it down a little bit, at least that bit there. That would probably be better. Actually, that makes the whole thing hang together better. So it's good that you brought my attention to that, because I checked the value. And incidentally, there's a good lesson there as well. Excuse me, in always checking your values. You know, you might think that you put the right value down. You might have mixed the right value here and then put it down, but you might find that once it actually gets down there, funny things can happen up here. You know, paint gets mixed up with other paint. That's very good to hear. Thank you. This is a good point. David says, what I'm learning is that the transition from light to shadow is a lot more sudden than I'd imagined. Yes, definitely, especially on a light local. I'd assumed on a sphere it would be fairly gradual, but it turns out not to be the case. No, what happens actually is that on the light side, so we're trying to keep a clear separation between light and shadow. And on the light side, you do get a slow change in values, but within a fairly narrow range. And then suddenly you hit the terminator and it falls off a cliff. And then you just soften that edge on the terminator. And that's how you keep a really clear separation between light and shadow. And that's one of the keys to making realist painting work. Simplification of the light and shadow shapes and a lot of clarity. Is there an occlusion shadow? Not really. I mean, because you can't see, if this was a rounded object and you could see underneath, there would be an occlusion shadow there. So an occlusion shadow is just where no light can get. With this, there isn't really an occlusion shadow because the bottom of the toilet roll is pretty much flat onto the surface it's sitting on. But if that was a sphere, there would be an occlusion shadow underneath, yes. Jim, thank you for that. I didn't know. Krita, apparently, it's also free and has lab values. Brilliant. That's a really useful thing to know. Really useful. Thank you. Okay. Demo 1 done. That's actually probably, that's like most of the time of this session is spent on that one because I wanted to make sure that I covered it. And hopefully I did. Thank you for being patient with me while I painted. Let me stick the light back on so you can see me again. Just to prove it's live. So I'm going to have a quick look. Be honest, I might only get to 2 questions today because I did spend quite a long time on that. I told you it was going to be informal, right? This is like question number 2 is, how can I keep my colours from getting too garish? Now, anyone who's learned with me before will know this is like pretty much a favourite subject of mine. It's generally called chroma. So usually people say, like as I was saying at the beginning, a lot of people said, how can I use complements to neutralize my colors? Usually people say, or to deaden them. Or some people do say to reduce chroma. Okay, so I'm going to change over to the palette now, and I'm going to show you how I approach managing this. First, I'm going to show you what chroma is, and then I'm going to mix what I would call a chroma string of a single value, and I'm going to show you how I mix it with a couple of different colors to show you how I would bring down the chroma of those colors. Okay. This will be possibly a little bit different than what you're used to. Let's switch over to this one. I'm going to take the photo reference off. And then I'm going to make the palette full screen. Seems like a good plan, right? And we'll do a little bit of color mixing. Here we go. So let me choose some colors. I'm going to choose something on the kind of orange yellow side. Orange, actually, let's have this. This is a good one to do. This is permanent orange, right? It's extreme in terms of chroma. It's very, very high chroma. Now, that's about as garish as paint gets. Doesn't get more garish than that. Really, really high chroma color. It even looks almost kind of lurid on the palette, right? Okay, and then I'm going to pick something on the other side of the hue wheel. So I've got something here, so let's pick a blue. Let's see if I can find I rarely use this color, but let's see if I've got a cobalt blue in here. I paint with it so rarely. Yeah, I do. I've got a cobalt blue. Why these two colors? Well, it should become fairly obvious, hopefully, when I start messing about with the paint. So first, I'm gonna talk really quickly about what chroma is. So this is a page from the Munsell student book, right, which my color course uses. By the way, someone was making a comment earlier on about Munsell, like training with Munsell and then painting more intuitively. And I completely agree with that. Now, my basic philosophy with all of this stuff is that you study with stuff like this, with these kind of tools, and the study is endless. But when you come to paint, you want to be able to use the knowledge that you've gained. This is my personal approach anyway. You want to be able to use the knowledge that you've gained in a slightly more freer and creative way. I do use Munsell right through my paintings. I do paint realism. I guess I don't know, maybe it's easier for other people to say what kind of painting I do, but it's realism, but I try to get some atmosphere and some expression into it. I do tend to paint with pretty natural color though. So this is value from light to dark. So this is basically the same as this value scale here. Obviously I'm missing a few. This is quite an old sheet. This is hue. So for hue, it's just the name of the color. Is it orange, red, violet, blue, green? And this here is chroma. And chroma is not given enough attention in painting, in color. It really isn't. People talk about value and hue a lot. People very rarely talk about chroma. And if they do, a lot of the time they don't really get what it is, frankly. So chroma is the intensity of the color. So all of these colors here, this strip, they're all the same value. They're all a value 4, which on my value scale is here. These are all the same value. They're all a value 4. The difference between them is that color gets more intense the further you move over to the right. And that's chroma. Now then, let's say I wanted to reduce the chroma of this color, or I wanted to neutralize it, or I wanted to deaden it, whatever kind of way you want to talk about it. Oh, just hang on 2 seconds. I just need to grab something I realize I haven't got. Because there's a little trick I want to show you. Rummages in the corner. Hopefully I can find it. I need to find my phone because I want to show you something a little trick that you can do with phones. And I've mislaid my phone. I think I do this deliberately because I really don't like phones. So I can't find my phone, so I'm just gonna have to describe to you how to do it. Let me just have a quick look and I'll see if I've left it somewhere. Okay, I can't show you this because I can't find my phone. Apparently I've left it outside somewhere. I'm terrible with phones. Sorry about that. Unplanned interruption. So I'm just going to have to describe to you like how you can do this. Oh, couple of questions here. Kathy says, Chroma Magic changed my life. It's brilliant. I agree. It is absolutely fantastic. Cindy says, could you please share the name of the software you mentioned earlier? I'm not sure which one you mean, Cindy. There was GIMP, Photoshop, Affinity Pro. The nice thing about Affinity Pro that I forgot to say is that it is, with Photoshop you have to pay monthly. Affinity Pro, you buy it once and it's yours. I think it's about 67 quid, so I think that would be about $100 or something like that. Wouter says, while we are in between studies, would you all share your favourite painter? Bormans, wow, yeah. You're very welcome, Honora. I find it very difficult to say my favourite painter. Yeah, chroma and saturation are not quite the same thing, but they're almost the same. I mean, conceptually, they're similar, although they're worked out different ways. It's a little bit nerdy to be pointing out the difference between them, but they are slightly different. Right, favourite painters. That's really hard, because it changes a lot depending on what I'm looking at the time. But I tell you one who's always stayed with me and is always in the back of my mind, Eugène Carrière. French painter. But there are a lot of contemporary painters whose work I love. Kathleen Speranza. You probably all know her work. Astonishing flower painter. I really like, actually, a friend of Kathy, Scott Connery. I really like his work as well. I'm a big fan of Richard Murdoch's painting. Katie Whipple. It's really hard to pick one out. I've just started messing about with portraits lately, and I really like. Oh, I've forgotten his name. That's so annoying. No, can't remember. It's gone. Anyway, let me go back to this. So on most color wheels, you could probably say that blue would be opposite orange because we have the classic color wheel, right? Well, actually, the normal color wheel that you have, which is made out of the primaries red, yellow, and blue, and the secondaries in between, is very, very lopsided. Now, this is the Munsell hue wheel, is perceptually much more accurate. So opposite an orange is a green blue, okay? So if I wanted a true complement of this orange, it wouldn't be cobalt, it would be slightly more green. So I would be inclined to mix something like a little bit of phthalo with that. But the thing is, you need to make them the right value. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of reducing chroma now. Okay, so if I just mix if I say, right, I'm going to reduce the chroma of the orange by mixing in some blue. If you were using like the standard palette, that's probably what you would do. What's happened? Yes, I have reduced the chroma, but I've also changed the value, like a lot. You know, it's got a lot darker, and I've also changed the hue. You know, I mean, you get some very, very unpredictable results if you try to do that. And part of the reason is because it's not quite a true neutral. It's not a true complement, sorry. The other thing is you need to make sure they're the same value. Now, the trick that I wanted to show you is, say I want to know, this is really hard to judge the value of this, right? It's hard to judge because the chroma is so high. So I can put little dabs, you know, where I think it probably is, like a value 5, maybe a value 6. And squint down and I can kind of get an idea that it's about a 5. But it's very hard to judge, especially if you're not used to doing it. Judging the value of a color is a skill that needs to be developed like any other. But what you can do is you can put little dabs of it on your value scale like this. Get your camera, take a photo of it, and then quickly go into the editing menu of the photo and desaturate it. Take all of the color information out so it's just black and white, and then you can see exactly what the value is. I was going to show you it. It looks great when you see it, but I can't find my phone, so I can't do it for you at the moment. But try it. If I remember, when I send out the link tomorrow, I'll send you a link to a video on how to do it if I've got time. But it's not difficult, you know, you just need to figure out how to drop all of the chroma out of a picture in whatever phone you've got. Now, the biggest problem was the change in value, right? So I need to make sure that this is the same value, because if I mix the same values together, then that's taken one of the problems out of the equation, right? What value is this? Let's find out. Way darker than you'd think. It's about a value 2 to a 2.5. So I need to bring this up so it's the same value. So I'll mix it with white until I get it up to about the same value, right? And at least then the value shouldn't change quite so much. And, you know, I don't care if you use Munsell or not. I don't care what approach to color you particularly like. This is a basic rule in color mixing, is that if you mix similar values together, you get much more reliable results. So that's probably about the same value, maybe slightly darker. So, you know, I'm trying to give complement mixing its best chance now by making these the same value. So if I get a little bit of the orange and I mix in a little bit of this, now it's the same value. Whoa, the value changed again. The color that I end up with is darker than both of those. It's one of those little aberrations of color mixing. You know, this is why I don't do complement mixing, because you get such strange results. Okay, so I can correct that though. If I want to keep it the same value, then I bring some white in until I get it back up to the same value again as the value that I started with. But I mean, you know, what I'm hoping that I'm kind of demonstrating here is that complement mixing is really tricky. It's basically, I mean, people do say that between the complements you will mix a straight line that will end up in a true neutral in the middle of the color wheel, and frankly that's nonsense. It just does not happen that way. Okay, so I've got it back up to about the same value. Not too bad. It is a lower chroma version of this color, but that is more red. It's gone more red. It's lost some of the orange. Okay, so what about if it's, so I've told you that that wasn't a true complement. It actually needed to be a slightly green blue if it was truer. Yes, I like Carlo Rosso's paintings as well, very good. Just trying to catch up with the comments quickly. Oh, that's handy, Woodsy. Thank you for sharing that. So this would need to be like more, let's use the one that's the same value. It wants to be a little bit more of a green blue. So I'm going to put out a tiny amount of phthalo because it's a very clean, high chroma blue-green. I'm going to bring that up to the same value with white, which has to go a long way because I'm always mixing value to value, right? I'm giving complement mixing its best chance to work. And if I bring a little, okay, it's a little bit light, but if I bring a little bit of that into there, then I get a bit more of a green blue, which actually, in terms of the Munsell hue wheel, so this is kind of ironic that I'm using Munsell in order to try and do a better job of complement mixing. It's more like this. It's more like this green blue here in terms of hue. The value, I want it to be about the same value as this, which is about a 5, maybe slightly higher. Okay, that should be good. Let's get a little bit of the orange and we'll try this one. Mix a little bit of this blue in. The value falls off a cliff again. It's gone. You must be able to see like how much darker that has gone. So if you think about how careful we were being in our values study just now about making sure we had the right values, if you start introducing bad values like that, value mistakes essentially, I mean, you're really making life hard for yourself. I've got to bring the value back up again with white. Although this time, you know, I've got a slightly different color. It's lower chroma. I think the hue is actually better. That is slightly more consistent. But none of these are the way that I would do it. Okay. So I think complement mixing is, you're basically setting yourself up to have a really hard life if you use complement mixing in order to neutralize color. It just makes it a little bit harder. All right, then Paul, show us an easier way. I will. Suzanne knows where I'm going. Let me get all of this color off here. I mean, if you want, like, if you're not bothered about accurate color and, you know, realistic color, then, you know, play, have fun. There are no rules about painting. If you can use any color you like. I'm talking about if you want to paint something that looks realistic, realism and realistic color. That's all I'm talking about here. None of the stuff that I'm talking about applies to every kind of painting. Absolutely not. It doesn't necessarily apply to Impressionism or anything like that. Certainly doesn't apply to, well, I guess it could apply to symbolism, but the point I'm trying to make is that you're free to use any approach you like. I'm just talking about for people who want to paint with, they want to paint realism, stuff that looks real, this is going to help you. So we said this was about a value 5, right? And it's an orange, okay? Raw umber is a yellow orange. This is a slightly red orange and this is a slightly yellow orange raw umber. So it probably would be better to use burnt umber for this. You could use it, but I find raw umber will do most of what I need. Here we go, Peach, it's coming. Neutralization method. That's probably a nice way to describe it. I call it dropping chroma. First thing I need to do is make sure that these are the same value, right? I've overshot. Too busy yakking again. I'm going to have to put some raw umber back in that. Raw umber is quite a weak tinter. So it's very easy to overpower it in a mix with white. And that's lead white. If that was titanium white, would overpower it way quicker. And that's why people often talk about the chalkiness of lead white, a little bit lighter. So the point is I'm trying to make sure that these are the same value, right? So what I have here is a very high chroma, red, orange, and a very, very low chroma, slightly yellowish orange, but they're pretty much the same value, okay? So if I take some of the orange, may as well take it from there, I don't know why I put it there really. I guess because I can show you a chroma string. And I bring in some of this raw umber mix. Can you see that the value isn't falling off a cliff? It is dropping slightly, but nowhere near as much as when I put the blue in. I suspect that my raw umber mix is very slightly too low in value because I didn't check it all that carefully. But this is much more reliable as a way to drop chroma. You know, the hue hasn't really changed that much. If I hadn't put too much raw umber back in. If this was had been a better value, I wouldn't have had to do any adjustments. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you still do have to do a bit of adjustment. There is no method that I've found to do this which is going to be a panacea and it will sort everything. But this is certainly a lot more controllable and perceptually a lot more accurate. So if I wanted a chroma that was somewhere in between those two, then I just mix one with the other and I get one that's in between. This doesn't work near as well with component mixing. If I want one that's between this very low one and this one here, I just get a little bit of both and mix between them, and I get what I call a chroma string. So these are all the same value. The hue hasn't changed particularly, but what is happening is the chroma is going up a lot from there to there. So this is like a version of this, but the steps aren't particularly accurate, you know. So this is the way that I teach dropping chroma now in live workshops. In my color course, I still teach it with the chips, with the student book, because it's really, really good to have that kind of accuracy when you're practicing. But that is a pretty good chroma string for orange. So what about if it was a blue that I wanted to drop the chroma of? Well, I'm just going to show you this quickly because I used raw umber because it's quite close in hue to this already. I could have used burnt umber, that would have worked well too. So raw umber isn't quite a yellow, it's a yellow orange, which is why I find generally anything on the red, orange, yellow side of the hue wheel, even heading towards yellow green, raw umber is the best way to drop it, the chroma. If it's a blue, then I'll use ivory black. And the reason for that is because ivory black is a blue. But what value did we say this was? About a 3? No, darker. It's about a 2.5. So I want to make sure I'm mixing value to value. So I'm going to get this black up to a 2.5. I mean, you can already see, hopefully, that that's very cool, you know. It would be even more so if I used titanium white, because titanium white is a slightly cooler white than lead white, which is slightly orange. Went too high. Yeah, good. So if I want something in between the two, in terms of chroma, without changing the value particularly, a little bit of both. And I get a lower chroma blue, somewhere in between the two. If I had, say, blue, and I'd already mixed white with it, so it was lighter. Not sure if I'm going to have enough paint to do this, but so let's say that was my blue, then I would approach it in exactly the same way. So obviously that was the straight tube color. So let's find out what value this is. It's about a value 5. So then I would get black and white also to a value 5. We're always trying to mix the values together. So the reason this works is because the hues are related. So I would always try to find something where the hues are related. If it was green, I would probably use a little bit of both, a little bit of the raw umber and a little bit of the black. Okay, a little bit of both. And I'll get something, the value won't change particularly, but I'll get a chroma which is somewhere in between the two. Desaturated is another word you could use. Although saturate, I don't know, you can get too wound up about the correctness of these terms. Basically, desaturated is pretty much the same thing. And if I wanted to go in between, I mean, the amount of control you have like this is very, very fine. Where would you use something like this? Where would you need to control this fine over your chroma? Well, it's really, really useful if you're trying to match a color accurately, because most of the colors in nature are way, way low chroma than you would think. So it's really useful for that. Okay. When you're painting flowers, it's absolutely crucial to be able to control the chroma and the value really, really carefully at the same time. Okay, so basically I would cover the whole of the hue wheel if I wanted to reduce the chroma. Anything around here, from there round, I'm using raw umber. Round here I'd probably go to a little bit of both, more of a true neutral. Anything around here, black. Mix it to the same value and you will get a much more controlled way of dropping the chroma. Now this is Munsell, right? But these are not exact Munsell steps by any means. But it's in the same way as I use the value scale, where I mix some values and then I interpolate between them, because nature isn't digital, right? It's a continuum value. But it helps to be able to break things down and simplify them. It will let you find a way in. Does that make sense? Yes. It's also worth saying, thank you, Linda, for bringing that up. I'm using Michael Harding raw umber, and raw umbers especially can be really, really different from brand to brand. Some of them are green, so be careful with those. But if I found myself with one of those, I'd mix a little bit of burnt umber with it, which would bring it back round to where, you know, it would be a yellow-orange again. Need to drink something because my throat's going. Old Holland is nice paint, actually, yeah. Oh yeah, do all right, Dina, I will. Dina says, could you show us how to make the permanent orange darker for a shadow? Absolutely. I was going to cover this in more detail in another stream, but I'll just show you really quickly, right? So let's say here is the orange. I'll mix you a string of like how I would approach this going from light to shadow. You know, would that be useful? Now with something like this, say the object was painted that color, so it was a sphere or something, or a jug or something that actually was that color. As it went up the value range, the chroma would drop, so you can use white, especially if you use lead white as you're going up the value range. I wonder, no, I can't do it. I just thought, I wonder if I could paint these, mix these colors and paint them over the loo roll, but I can't because they'll mix with the color that's already on there and it would be disastrous. I would have to wait for it to be dry. So this would be going up into the light, gradually getting lighter. It depends on the color, but this won't change the hue over much as we go up the value range. You might find you want to add a tiny bit of yellow in there. But what happens when we go down into the shadow? Well, I want a dark orange, okay? Now, because this is the highest chroma I can pretty much get in a red orange, what I would really want for this is the highest chroma that I can get in a dark orange, a red orange. Because what happens is, when you go from light to shadow, generally speaking, the hue doesn't change that much. It does change a little bit. And it also depends on the local as well. And I'll probably do a session just on that, like light and shadow colors of different locals. So tell me, pop it in the comments, everyone who can think of what would you use to create a dark orange. Now, bear in mind, it needs to be really, really, really dark, because that's about a value 5. So that means for the shadow of that, I want to be down like, a value 2, a value 1. It needs to be really, really dark. So I need a low value, high chroma orange. Peach says, is flake white similar to lead white? They're the same, basically. And I use Rublev, which I like very much. Okay, we're getting the answer, to be honest, the ones I expected, burnt umber. Burnt umber fine. You know, let's get some out. Have I got any? I know I've got some. I don't often use it, so To be honest, I never paint with it anymore because I've found I don't need it. I haven't even got any. I was going to show you burnt umber, but I haven't even got any in my paint box. And the reason is because it's not what I would use. Why? Because the chroma is too low. It's the right hue, it's the right value, but the chroma is really low. And for a shadow, in a really high chroma local like this, it needs to be the highest chroma I can possibly get. So what would I use? Transparent red oxide. It's way, way higher chroma. It's the right hue, it's a red-orange. It's way, way higher chroma though. And that is, in terms of shadow, that's like a 2. If I wanted to go right down into the shadow, transparent red oxide and black. That's going to get me like pretty much the highest chroma that I can get down there in the red-orange at the lowest possible value. And now I use a lot of transparent colors, and I use them because I want the high. So every now and again I want the highest chroma possible, you know. So if this was like let's see what, looking for a brush I can use. If this was a sphere, say, that was lit from the left, into the half tone, a little bit lower than the local, and then out into the local color, we hit just around the half tone. Then we get into what we usually call the dark light. And then the light. Obviously this is really rough, but it gives you an idea, like if I was painting a sphere, got a bit too high on the value there. That would work well as the shadow color. Have to soften our terminator a bit, of course. Just a little bit. Maybe we would have a little bit of reflected light in the shadow. Bring the value up a little bit, and people always overstate the value of the reflected light. And maybe it's a shiny sphere, so we actually have a, you know, and then now here we would have an occlusion shadow. We would have a very dark shadow there, you know. Cast shadow. Transparent red oxide would be my choice. And the reason is it's the highest chroma I can get at the lowest value, and it's about the right. You know, it's about, probably enjoying this a little bit too much. It's about the right hue. Got all my neutrals here, may as well make this into a little painting, right? And don't forget, obviously, that a cast shadow gets softer the further away. This is probably too small to see on the screen. I know, I'm sorry, I'm just messing about. But that would work really well as the shadow color of an orange sphere. So burnt umber would get you really close, but it wouldn't quite have the chroma. You would lose just a little bit too much chroma. If you wanted it to really sing, the shadow, you would really need to use something higher chroma. And the only thing that's higher chroma down there is transparent red oxide. But that's not for every orange sphere. It's only for very high chroma orange spheres. You know, this is about the highest chroma orange you can get, really. So Debbie says, I get confused when artists say that chroma changes when receding into shadow and that the chroma becomes cooler. Well, chroma can't become warmer or cooler, not really. I'm going to do a stream on this. I'm going to do a stream on light and shadow colors, definitely. Chroma doesn't become cooler in the shadows. It depends on the local. If it's a very high chroma local, then the chroma does drop in the shadows. If it's neutral, then the chroma actually can go up in the shadows sometimes. So I'm going to have to do a stream on this light and shadow colors and go into a bit of depth on it, because it makes a big difference. Okay. Suzanne says, this Michael Harding permanent orange is the highest you can go. It's like a 14 or a 16. Yeah, it's off the charts. I mean, it's very rarely. The only time I ever use this color unadulterated is sometimes with flowers, or if I'm painting tangerines. It's the only time I'll use it, you know. Yeah. So Pete says, that would be a great stream, then I will do it. And she says, I've always been told warm light, cool shadows. Yeah, usually it's cool light, warm shadows in interior light, and warm light, cool shadows on the outside, but it depends on the light. If it's an overcast day, there's hardly any change. And people usually overstate it, and a lot of that comes from Impressionism, you know. So I've dropped a little bit too much chroma. Sorry, I'm fiddling. It's so hard not to fiddle sometimes. Okay, it says, yes, a stream on light and shadow. Then we shall do it. We shall do it. You know what? I think I'm going to... I was going to do one more. What was the other question I was going to look at quickly? Oh, how do I choose which colors, which tube paints I use when I want to mix a particular color? Do you know what? I think I'm gonna kind of put a hold on that one for now, because I've already been going about 2 hours, so I want to wrap this one up now. That's going to need about half an hour for me to explain it properly, I think, with a few examples. I don't want to rush it, and I have a feeling that, see, I got the value wrong there. I have a feeling that if I do it now, I will end up rushing it a little bit, and I would rather not do that. I want to give you a proper in-depth description of why I do that, so I'm going to leave that one for now, I think, just to be on the safe side, because it's better that I give you something that you can. I'd rather do it justice and give you something that you can take away and use rather than rush through it. So I guess I've learned something today, that trying to cover 3 questions in one session is maybe a little bit too much. But listen, thank you very much for coming along, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. So let's make this a regular thing. I don't know how often, maybe once a month, and obviously it will depend on what I'm doing. At the moment, I'm between workshops. I've got another one starting in about 2 or 3 weeks. So I've got the time to do stuff like this. But it can be difficult to find the time when I'm busy teaching and painting. But I'll try, maybe once a fortnight or once a month. We'll try and have a regular thing. I'll just come along and I'll answer questions about color mixing, painting, whatever you want. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I've had an absolute blast, I must say, and I hope you have as well. I will send you out an email for anyone here who registered for the session. I know some people will just have turned up. Unfortunately, I can't email you because I don't have your email addresses, and so there's no way for me to know if you came or not. But if you drop me an email, or I don't know, send me a message on Facebook or something, I'll send you the links to the resources, because I've got a bunch of resources I'm going to send out tomorrow to everybody. All of the stuff that I covered today and a few little bits more. Thank you. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. That's brilliant. Okay, so what I want to do with this mainly is I want to give you some ideas to try. I want to give you some ideas for little practice things that you can do when you're in your studio by yourself. And the thing is, I think with a lot of this stuff, we tend to think that there are really hard and set rules that we must learn from somebody. And sometimes I think it stops us from doing our own experimentation. And you can actually go out, you can find answers to questions with your brushes in your hand. So You know, a lot of what I try to do with the free stuff that I put out, the videos I put out, and that kind of thing, blog posts that I used to do, not so much now, is to try and give you some tools so that you can do some of your own investigation and play around. So have a go at this stuff. Try and paint a blue sphere. You know, what would you use for your shadow? Well, you'd need a really low value blue, right? So maybe a phthalo blue would work mixed with a little bit of black. You know, just try some stuff and try and do little paintings, little sketches. Don't get too wound up about it being a finished piece of work, because there's so much going on when you go for a full painting, a full performance, if you like, that it's very difficult to practice anything. The best way to practice, the best way to learn things is to create little exercises that zero in on one particular question and then see if you can find an answer. That's the way to do it, for sure. Oh, one other thing I was going to tell you about, I'll just show you this quickly. Because it's May, it's still May, right? Yes, for another week and a half. All of this stuff I cover in detail in my online colour course, which Suzanne was talking about earlier on when I was doing the toilet roll. And the toilet roll painting exercise is actually it's a part of that course. And it's May, it's spring, so I've got a discount on it, like a 30% discount. So what I'll do is, I was going to show you it now, but you know what, I'll just email you a link to it so you can have a look and find out a little bit more about it. Maybe on another one I'll show you inside the course a little bit more, but there's two ways to do it basically. There's either you can buy the course and then you got access for life, or you can subscribe to the online school and then you get that and a bunch of other stuff as well that you have access to as long as the subscription is active. So there's two ways, but there's a sale on the course. So I'll drop a link in the email anyway to the course, because if you want to do it, if you want to get really in depth with this stuff, it's a huge course, I've got to say. I've been adding to it for years, and it would probably take, I don't know, how long would it take to work through it now? 6 months if you really went for it. It's in depth. And it's all this stuff. It's like, but basically using the Munsell student book. So you need a Munsell student book to do it. But that's the stuff that basically taught me everything that I know about colour that I'm trying to pass on to you now. You know, there's absolutely no requirement to sign up for anything like that I have. I'm going to carry on doing these sessions anyway, and I hope you enjoy them. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you again soon.